Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new episode of the Skylanders Imaginators Versus series here on the channel. As always, the timer is going to start from the very moment the Skylanders are summoned, and in this case it's both the tech characters for their representative teams, but it would appear as though Chain Reaction has a slightly longer summoning in animation, so Dr. Crankcase is already kicking off the villains to a couple of frames lead, and they need as much lead as they can possibly get because they lost to the Senseis quite hard in the previous episode that was full to the brim with stuttering. I couldn't help myself but stutter every other sentence it seemed like. But when it comes to the villains, they are currently 50 seconds behind, so that's why they're going to be glad to be an entire second ahead of the Senseis already, it seems. Now, when it came to the villain losses in the previous episode, it wasn't just the 50 seconds that they are behind. They also lost a compadre, that being Bad Juju specifically, a really tragic loss for the villains, meaning that they really need to hope that they can catch up on time or acquire more Imaginite chests along the way, because they are currently not looking great in terms of their cast. They are down 9 to 10. But this episode right here isn't quite going to be filled, I should say, with as much failure as the previous episode. There is the stuttering already taking its place in the video, I was supposed to go as far to say, but the stuttering wasn't the only problems with the previous episode. There was the lack of audio synchronization, because I was trying to watch the playback through Premiere Pro itself, and it would appear as though my laptop couldn't quite handle that, so the gameplay was constantly lagging on my playback perspective. So what I did instead this time around is that I exported a video with the dual screens available as well as the timer, and I'm just watching back that playback through YouTube, so that now it is completely lag free whilst I have the playback before me as I post commentate. And speaking of post commentating here, Dr. Crankcase is so far obliterating the competition. He has made his way onto the swinging platforms as Chain Reaction has only just wrapped up with the combat back here, so it's time for Crankcase to jump down into the Earth scenario, where obviously Golden Queen is going to be taking precedence. Now that, my friends, is some fancy vocabulary. Chain Reaction finally catching up and getting to that Earth section, where he's immediately going to walk over to the treasure chest, and before he opens that, we're going to switch over to Barbella here. Despite Legendary Tri-Tip technically being off the Earth element, he is representing the Light element here, so that is why we're going with Barbella rather than Legendary Tri-Tip. Now that chest has been opened up, and it would seem as though Golden Queen is at a disadvantage here. The villains are playing first, and I have totally forgotten to get that treasure chest, so I'm going to have to be sure to go back and get that in the future, because the last thing the villains want to do is miss that collectibles objective. In fact, they almost missed the treasure chest. I was getting a bit too hasty for my own good with Golden Queen there, but luckily we got the chest in the end. And we're going to make our way all the way over to the left, and rather than switching out for the fire characters wasting time, we're going to go straight into the little hatch right there, and then once we're in that area, we're going to swap out for our dark representatives of each team, as that's what the element of the area shall be within this here wrecking room. I like how that really rolls off the tongue right there. That being said, Barbella has only just entered the room as Hudsicle begins solving the puzzle, as you see before you. Man, this episode was so much fun to record, because this is a really fast-paced level within the game, and more importantly is the combat here. It's a lot of tight quarters spaces, so it gets really intense and really fast-paced. This episode was a ton of fun. In fact, it was the most fun to record for this series to date, which is where this episode gets its name from, unless I choose something different. But this is what I would refer to as the fun episode, especially since you're going to see this coming up later in the episode. But these characters are an absolute badass from start to end here. Hudsicle has no combat to deal with, but he's still dealing with the puzzle relatively quickly right here. He's going to acquire all of that money. One other thing you should know about the villains is that halfway through the recording of Sky Fortress, the initial time round, footage wound up getting corrupted, or at least the recording for it did. So what I had to do is I had to open up a third profile, play up to the Sky Fortress, and then the villain senseis kind of got their second shot at the level. It is very unfortunate even that the footage corrupted. but there's not much I can do about it now besides, like I said earlier, play back up to that point in the game and then go through it with the villains a second time. And speaking of doing things the second time, that means that now Tycoon Crow gets to finally be placed upon the portal for the second time in this series, I believe, where he is going to be a badass. Look at that. All of these enemies have been absolutely obliterated. In sections like these where villains really do have the advantage because they defeat enemies so damn quickly, more so than the senseis. So in combat, villains can make up for lost time, despite the fact that senseis generally have quicker traversal. So levels like this, where the traversal is minimal and it's more combat orientated, the villains can really, as you're seeing already, gain some time, because Tycoon Crow has already completed the combat section. The only problem here is that he needs to make all of his way back. We're not going to bother switching back to the Earth element here, because that would be completely unfair to the villains, as they have already lost enough time going back for the treasure chest all that way. Yeah, that's a problem with me being so hasty, and me having to do this with the villains the first time around. If they were the second time around, then no doubt I'd be more prepared going into it. But now we're back to fire, where we're going to enter into this hatch, and for senseis actually have to switch out for airstrike, which seems to be taking a while because I forgot to have him in my direct side whilst recording for the sensei. So I suppose the senseis are also losing time, much like how the villains have already lost time. But regardless, the section here is off the air element, so we have to switch out for airstrike. And as for the villains, since Bad Juju was defeated in the previous episode, she is classed as dead and cannot be used again. So the villains are making up for all of that lost time by not having to switch out. So I suppose everything is evening out. It's the way of life. Sometimes life just kind of works itself out, and that's exactly how things are becoming balanced in this particular episode, where the villains are doing a double take for the Skystones, and it seems as though the strategy for the Skystones match is the exact same on the Sensei's perspective, so they are following the exact same strategy as the villains, which is why they are only a couple of moves behind. But there's much more to this section than just the creation clash. We also have obviously the troll radio that the villains need to complete, so they've got through the first round. Yes, the second round, and the third and final round was not failed. Now that is a miracle, because that would be a huge waste of time. Airstrike is choosing to go for the snail challenge next, but as for the villains, we're back to stage 1 of the egg rescue, because this is a fresh profile, like I was alluding to earlier. There are all of the eggs rescued, not the most efficient utilization of stage 1, but we got there in the end, and now it's Tycoon Crow's turn to collect all of the snail pieces whilst Airstrike completes the troll radio. This is seriously a neck and neck competition type moment. It's very rarely this close between these two teams, so now time for Tycoon Crow to open up that Imaginite chest and obviously add to their Imaginite chest collections, as Airstrike struggles a little bit more with the egg challenge, because obviously it was a harder challenge at that. We're going to see if all of these frames matter in the end, because my prediction is that one team is going to be several minutes ahead of the other, so in the end these kind of like frame losses probably aren't going to impact the outcome, and if they are, that is going to be something really fun to analyze in the finale, where we will do stuff like frame by frame breakdowns. There's plenty to look forward to, and we're almost halfway through the series. The next episode is going to obviously be airing next week. We're going to have a double bill next week for these episodes, because I missed a week in between, and so next week not only are we going to have the 6th episode where we talk about the award show that's going to be taking place at the very end of the show, but we're going to have the 7th episode as well as a double bill, like I said earlier, make up for the episode that was lost in between weeks. Now we are currently proceeding to smash up these vultures, and that is a ton of fun. The villains are ever so slightly ahead still, so let's see if they can continue with this momentum. The senseis are going to have fewer switch outs to worry about coming up, because there is the quick shot shrine, something which both teams definitely want to take advantage of in order to increase their Imaginite chests count. The villains want as many opportunities for these shrines as possible now that they've lost out of a chance for the Swashbuckler shrine, because Bad Juju was defeated in the 4th episode. Rather tragic at that. The point is, Tide Pool is the water quick shot, and water is the first element to have to deal with after the quick shot shrine in the battleship thingy-McBob, which I think is descriptive enough as is, so we're going to stick with that. Here I am, stuttering once more. I kind of promised a little bit less of that after it was in abundance in the previous episode. I think I stuttered enough in the previous episode to last the entire series. Well, if you thought that, apparently you thought wrong, because here I am stuttering again, and in the words of the mighty Tough Luck, you're going to have to deal with it. So there goes Taekwondo Crow. Though the Senseis with the switch outs, having one less in the battleship sequence, kind of just equalises the fact that they had to go back to Flarewolf after that air section again. So once again, like I said earlier, it's a way of balancing this series out. Goes around, comes around, and all that. Taekwondo Crow has already defeated all of these enemies. In fact, he's made his way to a quick shot shrine, whereas Flarewolf, in this traversal section, he's making up for all of his lost time. But in combat, he's not as quick at defeating enemies as Taekwondo Crow is, but he's just as fun in combat. Like, seriously, he's so fast-paced and wild. His personality is really what carries this character for me. But now, there goes Dr. Crankcase with his shrine, and he can actually increase his momentum for traversal by utilising that secondary attack button, that spin. So he's going to make his way to the hatch, whereas Tidepool has only just begun with her quick shot shrine. So there goes Dr. Crankcase, but he seems as though he's been a little bit hasty here in the main hangar. I'm pretty sure there might be an Imaginite chest to the left, but he missed it entirely. So to make things a little bit more fair and even, Tidepool is going to make that same mistake as soon as she enters the hatch. But speaking of mistakes, Dr. Crankcase fell down and has made his way all the way to the right of the battleship. You'll notice though, that is a massive mistake in the fact that Blastertron's soul gem has been completely blazed over. And the villains aren't even going to notice their critical mistake until the very end of the level. I was literally fighting with Doomlander, and then I realised during this recording that I forgot the Blastertron Soul Gem. So with the Senseis going through the second time with a more experienced run, they are going to be more successful at acquiring this collectible, because this time around I'm going to make sure I don't repeat the mistake. Tidepool is going for Blastertron's Soul Gem as we speak. Meanwhile, Dr. Crankcase is getting ahead of the competition. So really the only benefit the Senseis are going to get, or the villains should say, from this mistake is that they are going to be able to speedrun the level a lot more successfully. They are already making up that 50 seconds they lost in the previous episode. But that being said, because I didn't realise about Blastertron's fatal mistake and the fact that we missed his Soul Gem, I didn't realise that until the end of the level, so the villains are still going to go out of their way to gather collectibles that they don't need to, because they've already missed out on that star for the sake of that Imaginite chest collection. Suppose that now they can focus solely on that final objective, where they need no lives lost, all areas found, and the speedrun objective. So I suppose that when we go to get the legendary treasure, for one benefit to that will be the fact that it would unlock the area required for that star's completion in order to acquire an Imaginite chest. But actually acquiring the legendary selfie frame itself is completely unnecessary, because of the fact that we're not getting the collectible star with the villains no matter what, now that Blastertron's Soul Gem has been missed. But here comes one of the harder sections of the entire level, the platforming section. You've got to time this perfectly, because the physics here can be very jank. For a moment, I thought not even Blastertron, we're not playing as Blastertron, at least not yet, but Dr. Crankcase, it looked as though he wasn't going to make it. Fortunately, he did make it first try, which is really good for the timer of the villains. Got to make sure if they keep on top of it and keep ahead of these Senseis. Now that they have garnered that 50 seconds back, they need to maintain their lead. It's like the opening of Cars 3 all over again, getting the lead and just having to hold it. But hopefully this won't result in crashing and burning, unlike Lightning McQueen at the start of that movie, because the last thing the villains need to do is crash and burn. They've done enough of that already with the loss of bad juju, and now they have to deal with their slowest most character. Graveclobber might be very good in combat, but boy is his traversal slow compared to Tidepool. Tidepool must be about at least double as quick as him, twice as quick, double the speed. I don't know how grammar works, okay? You'd think I should, given that I got A's in English, but we're getting a bit off topic. Graveclobber and his combinations right now, he is looping with these enemies, he is toying with them. Chain Reaction has gotten the Imaginite chest, and his platforming was successful for first time around, which is a miracle for him, because he's not the easiest platformer, given how jank his hitboxes and his physics can be. But now we've headed into the light section for the villains already. Blattertron gets to now obliterate absolutely everything in sight, and the villains could have continued to save more time by avoiding the treasure chest collectible there. They don't need the collectibles, they just need to find all of the areas, and that treasure chest was not an additional area. Like I say, if I noticed that I missed Blattertron's soul gem in my haste recording for the villains, then I would have ensured to go through this level as fast as possible whilst also getting all of the objectives required for that third and final star. But unfortunately, I don't notice these things. We've already established my failures through this series, not only through the gameplay you see before you, but my lack of grammatical skills from earlier. Here we go, Blattertron gets to push these shells whilst Tidepool obliterates enemies. She is toying with them much in the same manner as Graveclobber, but here is a problem for Tidepool. She has been reduced to under half her health, yet she has a large combat section to deal with on the hull of the ship, I believe it's called. Hopefully I'm correct in having said that. But she has that massive combat section to deal with, followed by the Battle Gong. That's going to make things really tough for Tidepool to come through completely unscathed. Could this be the first loss for Sensei? Well, first things first, Legendary Tri-Tip needs to deal with all of these enemies, and losing him here, that cannot happen. First of all, no one bothered to deal with the Smasher Shrine this time around, it would seem, so Painyada is still yet to have gotten his debut from the villain's perspective, but that means that Legendary Tri-Tip needs to make it to that Smasher Doomlander so that then we don't wind up wasting another Sensei on that Smasher Doomlander. Let's be honest here, Tri-Tip is likely not going to survive the Smasher Doomlander, which is where Tidepool comes in. We might switch out for her for the Doomlander fight, we might not, once Tri-Tip is defeated. I'm not sure yet, I haven't recorded that far ahead in this series. No wonder why this episode had to be delayed, and I gave myself a break in between weeks. But we're making up for that, as Graveclobber is making up for any sort of lost time in the past by obliterating these enemies with so much speed that Tidepool doesn't stand a chance in this combat section in terms of getting through it as quickly as Graveclobber is right now. These hits are landing hard, and Graveclobber is able to summon those geysers with ease, which is dealing increased additional damage whilst he continues to toy with his enemies one-on-one with these combinations that are just really being racked up like an actual Lucha Libre. It sure is a good thing that that is where Graveclobber's inspiration comes from behind his design. Now, Tidepool is slowly but surely getting through the cutscenes for Senseis here. And by Tidepool, I mean Tri-Tip. I didn't realise that Tidepool hadn't had her summoning in animation yet. I forget that the summoning in animation happened after the cutscenes. The same happened for the villains. And now Tidepool is finally making her way to that large battle that Graveclobber has just defeated right now. But Graveclobber has not been very efficient in this platform and traversal right now. He got it correct the second time though, and that burger is healing him up. Very important for the Battle Gong that's coming up. That burger could be the difference between victory and defeat. So I suppose going through this section, switching out for Wolfgang, first of all, is going to give the villains a better leg up on the Senseis in terms of the speed they're going through this section, because Wolfgang is a quick traversal type character because of his dashing abilities, makes him quicker than Pit Boss, the undead representative for the Senseis respectively. So in other words, Wolfgang evens things out for the villains despite how much time Graveclobber would have lost being very inefficient with the platform and puzzle. Tidepool is obliterating everything on the Sensei's perspective, I'm noticing. She's been very efficient and she's actually playing this a lot more safely than she was previously. Realising now that she's at a health deficit, she's playing safe rather than quick. That's more important for the Senseis at this point because they cannot afford to lose Tidepool, especially when they currently have the advantage of the higher cast number. They want to maintain that advantage for as long as possible, but here they switch out for Pit Boss, whereas Wolfgang has already completed the legendary self-reframe section. So again, everything has really balanced out. Despite Graveclobber's mistakes, despite his lower traversal speed, he has gotten some food for Battle Gong, and they have found that area which is necessary for the third star. If they're going to miss out on the collectible star, then they need to make sure that they acquire that additional third star in order to keep up with how many Imaginite chests the Senseis are going to be collecting in the future of this series. After all, the Senseis are going to be getting the Swashbuckler Shrine, whereas the villains are not. We know that for certain because Chain Reaction's appearance in this episode has come to an end. He has completed his final tech section without being defeated, so he will be able to access that Swashbuckler Shrine, no problem. But here we have the villains with the Battle Gong, and as you can tell, it gets really crowded, but Graveclubber has been an absolute beast. He's playing things safe. He's not necessarily going out of his way to defeat enemies or attack them, engage them in combat particularly quickly. Instead, at the moment, he's avoiding them. He's focusing on dodging and outmaneuvering them. He's down to almost half health, but now he has the space to bring back the geysers, even though by punching he did hone in to that mega vulture's attack. He has to be way more cautious of that in future, but now he has his geysers. He can attack enemies as soon as he gets through his geysers, which are going to actually trap that vulture temporarily. You got to be careful though, because even though he's trapped, during his charged animation, he can still deal the damage. Graveclubber avoids the vulture, which is important because I believe that would have been a death-defining blow. But luckily, Graveclubber gets through the combat section, not completely unscathed. He definitely was wounded from it all, but luckily for Graveclubber, wounds heal. Scars do not. We know that from Lord Shen in the climax of Kung Fu Panda 2. And this right here isn't even the climax of this episode, and it's already more exciting than Kung Fu Panda 2, which is saying a lot because Kung Fu Panda 2 is pretty exciting in and of itself. That's just how good this episode is. That's how much fun this episode was to record. As the villains switch out for Blastertron, once again he makes a second appearance in this episode, as he has the honor of taking down the Knight Doomlander, as he is a knight himself. Now Tidepool absolutely obliterating everything because she's playing things so safe, so efficiently, so well. She has barely even taken any damage from this Battle Gong whatsoever. I believe she's only taken a couple of hits from the smaller enemies. The larger ones, in fact, because she's staying still, the vulture, who is blind, cannot hear her and cannot charge for her. That was beastly. Tidepool annihilated that and kind of deserves the set after all that, even though it is wasting time on the Sensei's behalf. But the villains also had to deal with a set being complete, so the time is even on both of their countdown timers, or I suppose it's a count-up timer. I don't know if the specific names for timers are clearly weird and confusing, as they turn my brain to absolute mashed potatoes, which now, that makes me hungry. We're almost 2 hours into the run for both these characters, or both of these teams I should say, and they're not even halfway done with the game yet. So the timer at the end of this is going to be rather interesting. This whole series has been interesting, seeing these characters pitted against one another. If you told me at the start of the series that the villains would be going into the 5th episode with a cast deficit, that the villains would be in trouble of losing this series at any point, I would be shocked. I am still shocked at this instant that the Senseis currently have the advantage in every single category besides the Imaginite chest having been collected, and that's since the villains were able to get the speedrun objective in Mushroom River successfully, granting them 1 extra Imaginite chest from the level star, and they also completed the grind challenge successfully in Shelmont Shores. That is where their 2 Imaginite chest advantage comes from. But if the Senseis are able to complete the speedrun objective here for the 3rd star, then the Senseis are going to gain back one of those stars because they have completed the collectible star where the villains were unsuccessful in this level. Things would be absolutely neck and neck right now if the Senseis didn't have to go out of their way to get Blastertron's Soul Gem and lose about 50 seconds, which means that come the end of this episode, the villains will be with the shorter timer. And speaking of when this episode comes to an end, we are actually going to leave the Guacamole Monster for the next episode, because whilst the Guacamole Monster fight takes place, I can explain what's going to be happening with the award show at the end of the series, and better yet, I can announce what the awards are actually going to be. So the episode is actually going to wrap up, and the timers are going to stop on the very first frame of the final cutscene. It's going to be very easy to tell that the timer was stopped at the exact same frame for both of these teams via the cutscene, which is why we're doing it that way. Now, Ambush has to be careful of both the Knight attacks and the Wrecking Ball here, albeit yeah, he can use the Wrecking Ball to his advantage to deal massive damage to the Doomlander, but as you could tell, Blastertron was just way more efficient at defeating this Knight Doomlander, because here Ambush is, he's not struggling, he has plenty of health to go around, but he hasn't yet defeated the Doomlander. It's taken him much longer than it did for Blastertron, but Ambush is slowly but surely getting there with his excellent animations. Finally, he brings an end, and you can see what the first frame of that cutscene looks like. It's rather blurry. Obviously, the motion blur from the ship animation would have created such a thing, but that exact same frame is going to be what the Sensei's timer stops at once they reach that point. But as you can tell, the seconds are counting up whilst the villain's timer have stopped, and those 50 seconds that the Sensei's did have over the villains, well, let's just say that lead is dwindling. Again, like the beginning of Cars 3, the Senseis are fading fast. What is it with this episode and Cars 3 references in particular? Cars 3, very underrated Pixar movie. But the Senseis have finally finished this. Let's see if they are successful with the triple stars. There is their middle star, but were they successful for speedrun objective? They were by 20 seconds. That is close, but with an additional star, that means the Sensei is going to have a 1 Imaginite chest bonus compared to what the villains are at. So slowly but surely, the Senseis are closing that gap, but after one hell of a comeback, the villains are now ahead on the timer once again, so the Senseis need to maintain their momentum when it comes to their larger cast, but we will see how things shake out in the next episode. I cannot, in good conscience, end off this video without first thanking all of my incredible channel members whose continued support help make these videos possible. Without them, these videos would be near impossible to make, so from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate every last one of them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, there are plenty of options on screen now to explore, and please consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. On that note, this video is coming to an end, so thank you so much as always for watching. Until the next video arises, peace!